liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.
You're tapped in, so let's get right to it. So Donald Trump is claiming that progress is about to be made in terms of the negotiations with Iran with the ceasefire and peace deal and everything else that Trump has been lumping into this so-called negotiation for peace and ceasefire, none of which to this day have been proven factual, especially from Iran saying, yeah, we talked to Trump and we're talking about, yeah, this, that, and the third. We haven't heard any of that. Only time we hear these things is from Donald Trump. Iran seems to play along until they say, oh, there's too much hyperbole. Let's jump in there and embarrass him with, his lies. So, yeah, President Trump's statements about an impeding Iranian deal are always ongoing negotiations that he puts out there. A lot of us rather look at them like, fabrications, but Trump is always saying, oh, negotiations are going great. Oh, we're going to have their uranium. And Iran has said, no, we're going to keep our uranium. So where did Trump get this stuff from? Did this just fall out of the sky, or did someone put that in his ear to say? It's hard to figure out nowadays, but an official agreement has not been made, okay, or signed. Okay, while both U.S. and Iranian officials are actively engaged in indirect talks, as far as we really know, because most of what we hear is propaganda from mainstream media like Fox News and CNN of those who support the Trump regime and the propaganda it is always spewing, or it helps the administration to spew. This information comes from them. All right. So let's be just realistic about this. Okay. But anyway, while both the U.S. and Iranian officials are actively engaged in indirect talks, the situation remains highly fluid and faces significant political hurdles. No doubt about that. I'm pretty sure. But the current status of the negotiations, well, there is the claim. So Trump announced that a deal to end the conflict and reopen, and then again, so we're dealing with the propaganda and the narrative being pushed by those who support the Trump administration. So certain words are left out intentionally to paint or imply a whole unreal reality. You know what I mean? So the reality is it's not that. It's just something they always make up. Anyway, yeah, and I'm catching, the wording of this thing, but Trump announced that a deal to end the conflict, but it's more of a war than anything else, right? A deal to end the war and reopen the blockaded Strait of Hormuz. Blockaded, really? All right. Well, anyway, has been largely negotiated. He also stated that the U.S. is offering a fair and reasonable deal, though he cautioned that negotiators should not rush. So, I mean, here you say, and they have it in quotation, fair and reasonable. All right. And then also in the same sentence, though he cautioned that negotiators should not rush. Anytime Trump gets to talking about what's fair and reasonable, and then do what I say, and that, chances are no one's listening to him, especially if they just don't like the guy, or if as though they know this guy is trying to run roughshod over him, or portray some type of power in a country he doesn't control or have power over. A lot of people do resent hegemony, or the impression of it, that's put out into the world upon other nations. A lot of these people don't agree with that. They totally against it. And so we see a lot of that pushback from Iran when it comes to things of that nature. So when he says, hey, fair and reasonable, anybody in their right mind understands that Donald Trump does not know how to negotiate with world leaders or other countries who have been in the habit of doing their own thing and taking care of themselves. These nations that, hey, a lot of which have nothing to do with, or want to have nothing to do with, the United States. So when Donald Trump says, again, fair and reasonable, to who? And I can imagine that's what the Iranian government is saying when they heard this. Fair and reasonable to who? you know. But anyway, the potential in terms of the terms, multiple reports indicate that the emerging framework involves the United States lifting naval blockades and erasing sanctions in exchange for Iran disposing of its highly enriched uranium and ensuring safe maritime traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. Already, I'm going to tell you that's some crap. Already, I'm going to tell you that's some crap. You know, because one, the so-called naval blockade, they're not. That's the least what they're worried about. You know, they're controlling that part of the Strait of the Hormuz. They decide who goes in and out of that thing. You know, and after they leave out of it, you know, when they come, that's totally up to them, not the United States blockade. Trust that. The other thing is the uranium issue. We just heard from Matab, the Shah, the supreme leader there, that they're not going to give up the uranium. They're just not going to give it up. Not that they're going to keep it to continue to enrich it weapons grade level, you know, no. But they're not giving up their uranium. They've already said that, and it's been a week since he said it by now, you know. So again, this is more Trump rhetoric and propaganda, and a lot of which we by now should have gotten used to Trump lying, you know, or fabricating stuff, you know. By now, we should have gotten used to it. But I think for a lot of us, it just tends to, I mean, just to hear this exciting, the lies he tells, like, oh man, for real, you know, oh my God, yeah, it excites us to some degree. Anyway, but disagreements, despite Trump's optimism, major details remain unresolved. Iranian state media has contradicted U.S. announcements by asserting that Iran will continue to manage the Strait of Hormuz. And again, they just started this new thing over there in Iran where, yeah, they have a whole new system in place now. So in terms of what Donald Trump's talking about this blockade, this naval blockade, it doesn't even have anything to do with Iran. Is already implemented. It has already started this process. The blockade, they just sit there, you know, and whatever, for whatever. You know, Iran's not concerned with that. They've done what they've done. Iran seems to know and accepts fully that that is their trump card. And there's nothing Donald Trump could do about that, unless he's just willing to really risk American lives by trying to go in there and stop something. We've yet to see him do that with all the bluster, you know, and all the, you know, bravado and the, you know, big talk he's talked. He's yet to send anyone up in there. So that remains to be seen. But anyway, but you know, again, just everything seems so controversial. You know, Trump says one thing and Iran turn around and say, we didn't say, we don't know nothing about that. You know, or we're going to do this. He says controversial things. We're going to destroy the infrastructure and the hospitals and the schools and the dams. And come on, dude. Anyway, but GOP backlash in terms of the emerging outlines of the deal have drawn sharp criticism from hardline Republicans and some U.S. lawmakers who oppose leaving any nuclear material in Iran or erasing sanctions. All right. But Trump's response, Trump fired back at these critics on Truth Social, defending the ongoing diplomatic efforts and arguing skeptics and urging skeptics, excuse me, to wait for the final terms. All right. Now, to give us better context, as I always have to do or should do, I have a clip. I want to bring this clip in here before we do. As always, I say, hey, please like, share, follow, comment, and subscribe to TAP. That is the Art of Political Discourse. You guys' participation and viewership, it does mean a great deal to us. We thank all of you who have subscribed and continue to support this channel. So thank you again for that. Let's get to this clip. And you guys tell me what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. You don't have to agree. You can agree or disagree, but put those comments in there and we can have, or we can further along that discussion, even add on to the content. So if there's a disagreement, we'll go find the content to support what you're saying, or just put it out there for others to agree or disagree on or with. All right, that being said, let's get to this. This clip is courtesy of CNN. That's off on relationship with CNN and Donald Trump is crazy. But here this is. Trump says Iran deal largely negotiated Does Iran agree? That's what I've said. Okay, here we go.
Here with me now is North Carolina Republican Senator Tom Tillis. Senator, thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday morning. Let's talk about Iran and this potential memorandum of understanding with Iran. Your colleague, Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Roger Wicker said, quote, the rumored 60-day ceasefire with the belief that Iran will ever engage in good faith would be a disaster, unquote. I know that the details are vague at this point, but from what you've heard about this deal, would you support it?
It doesn't make sense to me. I'm not too far away from where Pompeo is, to be honest with you, and I support what Chairman Wicker says. Look, we were told about 11 weeks ago by Hegseth and the Department of Defense that they had obliterated Iran's defenses, and it was just a matter of time before we had the nuclear material.
Now, again, I go back to what I said. Trump creates scenarios, propaganda, and narratives. Some news affiliates, state news channels, they back it. They actually push it way further than Trump ever could. When this channel we did maybe 3 pieces of content about this very statement that Tom Tillis just said. We obliterated, we decimated, it no longer exists. And we were wondering on this end, like, how are they still fighting? And if there's victory, why are you negotiating for peace? Why are you negotiating for a ceasefire? If there's victory, and you're claiming the greatest military in the world, why aren't there boots on the ground? Why is this government in Iran still saying, man, what you talking about? Come on up in here. It made no sense. It made no sense. And we knew then it's all propaganda. Trump is a paper tiger, and as well as Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth, he's not going to kill anything or let anything die. Pete Hegseth, he might go get a lot of young boys and girls, and send them to their end, but he's not going to do it, and no more than Marco Rubio, another phony, so.
Now we're talking about a posture where we may accept the nuclear material remaining in Iran. How does that make sense at all? Also, a 60-day ceasefire and
Iran is not giving up that nuclear material. And again, not for the sake of building a nuclear weapon, although this host agrees or thinks that would be an equalizer. If Iran had a nuclear weapon or 2, maybe 3, you see none of these issues in the Middle East. In fact, all those wars over there would end abruptly. Israel would stop its hegemony or its push for this greater Israel plan. This land grab it does, this expansionism, that's occupying the Palestinian land, that would stop. They would honor and respect all treaties and agreements. We would see none of this. Because the looming threat of nuclear war would be too great to be inconsiderate of. You know what I mean? And so this is why they say, no, they can't have a nuclear weapon. They got everybody saying this. But no one is looking at the elephant in the room. Give them a nuclear weapon. Allow them to have it. And I guarantee you those issues in the Middle East that Israel always starts. Israel, for the last 2 years, 3 years, they say October the 7th. But they said enough to have you people forget what's been taking place since 1917 in Palestine. Everyone forgets all that. We're talking about millions of people who have died since they've gotten there. Something to think about.
Expecting that they're going to clear the Strait of Hormuz before the terms of the deal are established also seems questionable to me. There are a lot of things that need to be explained. And as I've said before, any agreement with Iran that isn't subject to ratification by Congress is I think, going to be doomed to fail, just like the agreement we're trying to replace, which was the failed agreement by Obama.
It is unclear as of now that the Trump administration is going to be able to get a better deal than Obama got without even having to fire a shot. You just mentioned.
What do you mean fire a shot? You guys been in war with them for 3 months. What do you mean without having to fire a shot? And again, Again, I think this is propaganda being pushed on the people. There's no deal. Iran is not giving up nothing. They're not going to give up nothing. They're not going to give up anything.
Secretary Hegseth, do you think the president has been advised well by Secretary Hegseth on this
No,
war?
I got one challenge for you. Try whisper flow one time, and I promise you'll understand why.
I actually, if you take a look at the assessment that Hegseth gave, at the end of the day, regardless of who collected the information, Hegseth owns it by being Secretary of Defense. When you tell the president that you have obliterated Iran and you're in a position to pretty much dictate terms, and now you see what we have, when you see Hegseth pull back on operations in Poland, when Ukraine, when Russia is raping, killing, murdering, torturing countless people in Ukraine, when you see these mistakes made by Hegseth, I think with all these mistakes in total, it's beginning to make Kristi Noem look like a 5-star recruit.
This guy, Thom Tillis, don't you guys see it? You hear it? You see it? Okay. You hear him? No. I don't know. He strikes me as an individual who wants this thing to continue. He strikes me as the kind of guy who would want to put boots on the ground and damn the casualties, you know?
So let's turn to what happened a few days ago. You and some of your Republican Senate colleagues had a heated meeting Thursday with Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. This was over the Justice Department's so-called anti-weaponization fund. Cruz has since
give you context on that statement, that comment. That's the $1.776 billion Donald Trump wants to settle with the DOJ. He initially sued for $10 billion. He's willing to settle for $1.776 billion, and that money will be given to some of his allies, some of the J6ers, who were wrongly investigated, arrested, however Trump sees that. But it's pretty much a reparations to some white people that Trump thinks should receive reparations.
Described the meeting as, quote, fireworks at an epic level and, quote, one of the roughest meetings he's ever seen in his entire Senate tenure. Tell us about the meeting.
Well, I've been at a lot tougher meetings than this one. And the other thing is, people were not mad at Todd Blanche. They were mad at this bogus agreement, the 1776 agreement, that he had very little to do with. But as I said earlier, I stand by it. It's stupid on stilts. Look, you're talking about people who assaulted Capitol police officers on January the 6th, were then convicted. Many of them pled guilty, or they were convicted by a jury of their peers. They could be eligible for this. Look, if you're talking about a fund that helps a man who was arrested and lawfare used against them at a school board meeting and was found innocent, that's fine. Help them out, pay them back. In fact, I think that they should seek redress through the agency that brought the lawsuit. But this is just, it's horrible politics. It's horrible timing. And Todd was there to try and explain it, or I should say,
it's corruption. Another thing that a lot of people don't speak about, include his Republican self, is the corruption that is abound. The whole political hierarchy structure in Washington, D.C. and most Capitol buildings in these states are full of corruption. That's just it. There's no way to put it. No other way to put it. Politics are corrupt now, y'all. And we're not calling it. This is why we see the corruption. This is why we see the absurdity in a lot of what not only President Trump says and does, but most of what we see senators, Congress people, the judiciary, we see this stuff happening. It's corruption.
The acting attorney general. It was a tumultuous lunch, but it was by no means the most tumultuous one that I've seen. But I do think that there was a very large number of people that said, look, we got to tackle affordability. We've got to have a coherent strategy in Iran. We've got to start looking at Putin as a real threat to the Western world. And this is all a distraction. And some people even think it may look like self-dealing. I think whoever advised the president on this being a wise idea should not see they should not plan on coming in the office on Monday if they're working for me. It was a bad idea, and there's no way you're going to make it better in its current form.
So there's a wider context here on the January 6ers, because on Friday night, the Justice Department moved to dismiss indictments against the Oath Keepers who had faced the most serious criminal charges after January 6th. The Justice Department is also now deleting old press releases from the website about January 6th defendants, which they're calling partisan propaganda. And then, in addition to obviously all the pardons that the president gave out to January 6ers, including those who beat up cops, some of them are now saying that they're going to apply for this payout from the anti-weaponization fund. And I guess the broader question I have is now, is the Republican Party now the January 6th party? Is the Republican Party a pro-insurrection party?
No, I don't believe so. Now, there's a question right now. Earlier this week, I was called a rhino by the president. And I will tell you, if the Republican Party stands for standing with insurrectionists who assaulted police officers, turning a blind eye towards Putin and what he's doing in Russia, negotiating a deal that may be subpar to the Obama deal, then don't call me that Republican. Just call me a conservative. And I'm waiting for my Republicans to come back if, in fact, they think they can argue that effectively. They can't. The American people want right-of-center conservative policies that have been successfully proposed by this president. But these distractions are harmful to our chances in November. And anybody that gets in the way of my colleagues, Republican colleagues, getting reelected are a problem.
Does Congress have the authority to stop this $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund?
Listen, what if you can start your own lending business, helping other businesses get access to capital?
That's a good question. I will let him answer to this.
I think that it wouldn't surprise me if we get back to reconciliation, and I believe that we should, because the underlying bill funding Homeland Security, because the Democrats have refused to even shut down our government, we've got to get back to it. But I wouldn't at all doubt that there will be amendments to rescind the agreement and to defund it, to do whatever they can. And it's a shame, because what Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general, was coming to the lunch for was describing the anti-fraud funding that they wanted, that there's no way that we're going to be in a position to fund $1.5 billion for an anti-fraud division when we've got this bogus 1776, I called it a payout pot for punks. You just can't have those two equivalent numbers at the same time. It makes no sense. So it's politically tone deaf. Whoever did it should be fired. Let's figure out a way to help people who are victims of warfare, but not people who are convicted by a jury of their peers or pled guilty to assaulting a police officer. Please.
Okay. Now, again, I think what most of we miss, or they miss in terms of politicians, is the actual corruption that's taking place in the political arena, from the White House on down. Again, from the White House to the Capitol, the state capitals, all these places, even on the city level and the county level, there's so much corruption. And as a result of that corruption, the people, the taxpayer, pays for that corruption. We pay for that corruption, This is why we see higher taxes, higher insurance, higher bills, gas, groceries, rent, mortgage. We're paying for corruption, and again, it starts from the top. It starts from the top. Donald Trump is the most corrupt person right now, in the media, limelight, in the limelight, there's no more corrupt individuals other than Donald Trump and maybe a couple of African presidents, as well as a couple of European presidents, but corruption is abound in this country for sure. It sets the precedent, I think, for around the world. You know, they want to say that Ukraine is the corruption capital of the world. I beg to differ. United States is the corruption capital of the world. You know, and again, it shows in the policies and the programs, and you know how the rich continue to get richer here, and the taxpayer, the poor, continue to suffer, while these guys walk away, pocket billions of dollars that could be going into the communities. But yeah, so these politicians are going to say what they're going to say, and Donald Trump especially. Again, one thing that Tillis did say I agree with is who's ever in Donald Trump's ear needs to be fired. If it's Pete Hegseth, get rid of the guy. You know, whoever it is, they need to get fired. They need to be out of the way. All right, tell us what you think about this piece. Now, I thought that this piece was kind of a little bit all over the place, but there is the exaggeration that Donald Trump loves to partake in. Donald Trump, he exaggerates to such an extent, I swear he will have you excited, even with how stupid, you know, most of it is. You know, the clownism of Donald Trump sometimes is enough to just, okay, let me hear what he said again, or I don't want to miss what he's going to say next time or this time. All right. And that's part of the problem. His exaggeration, though, is dangerous. You know, let's get to the core of that, though. Making light of it, but at the same time, it is dangerous because there are some people who believes exactly what he says and will not question it. All right. Tell us what you think. Put your thoughts in the comments and continue to support us. We appreciate your support and your viewership. Take care of yourselves and one another.
You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.